This is Detroit, once the richest city in America. In 1950, Detroit was the fourth richest city in America. It had the highest per capita income in the country. People called it the Paris of the West. 60 years later, Detroit became the largest city in American history to file for bankruptcy. A third of its population vanished. More than 70,000 buildings stood abandoned. Streetlights went dark across hundreds of streets because the city could no longer afford to pay the electric bill. What happened to a city once seen as a symbol of the American dream? This is the story of Detroit, where one industry built an empire, and that same industry ended up tearing it all down. The rise of Motor City. In the early 20th century, Detroit was just a small port city on the shores of Lake Michigan. But everything changed when Henry Ford introduced the mass assembly line in 1913. For the first time in history, an automobile could be built fast enough and cheap enough for the working class to afford. Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, the Big Three, one after another, set up headquarters here, turning Detroit into the automotive capital of the world. The jobs drew millions. White workers from the South, Black Americans seeking a way out of racial oppression during the Great Migration, immigrants from across Europe all poured into Detroit, chasing the same hope. A factory job that could support an entire family. By 1950, Detroit's population peaked at nearly 1.85 million people. It was the fourth largest city in America, behind only New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia. A working-class white middle class rose almost overnight. Homes, schools, shopping centers. Detroit became the blueprint for the post-war American dream. The first cracks. But beneath the glamour, the cracks had already begun to form. The practice of redlining credit zoning based on race made it nearly impossible for Black families to get loans to buy homes in good neighborhoods. They were pushed into inner-city areas that were already deteriorating, while white families were encouraged to move to the suburbs with favorable loans. At the same time, the auto factories themselves began automating and leaving the city center, seeking larger, cheaper land in the suburbs areas largely reserved for white workers. The result? Job opportunities for the Black community in the inner city kept shrinking, right as their population there was growing, setting the stage for conflict to come. That simmering tension exploded in July 1967. A police raid on an unlicensed bar in a Black neighborhood sparked one of the most violent race riots in American history. 5 days of unrest, 43 people dead, more than 7,000 arrested, thousands of buildings burned to the ground. In the aftermath, white flight. The mass exodus of white residents from the city accelerated like never before. Within a decade, Detroit lost hundreds of thousands of residents, and with them, the tax base that kept the city running. The collapse of industry. If the riots were a wound, what happened in the 1970s and 80s was the fatal blow. The 1973 oil crisis turned Americans away from the large, gas-guzzling cars that had long been Detroit's strength. Meanwhile, Japanese automakers like Toyota and Honda flooded the U.S. market with smaller, more fuel-efficient, more reliable cars. The Big Three responded far too slowly. Product quality declined just as the competition grew stronger. Factories shut down one after another. Hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs disappeared for good, not just in Detroit, but across America's entire Rust Belt. From 1950 to 2010, Detroit lost more than 60% of its population. Neighborhoods that once bustled with life were reduced to a scattered handful of occupied homes, surrounded by dozens of abandoned ones. The city was shrinking so fast that officials even considered formally shrinking its municipal boundaries. Tax revenue collapsed, leaving the city unable to afford basic public services, police, fire departments, streetlights, schools. A downward spiral had begun. The fewer the services, the more people left, the emptier the budget became. Bankruptcy. By 2013, after decades of accumulating debt estimated between $18 and $20 billion, Detroit's city government had run out of options. On the 18th of July, 2013, Detroit officially filed for Chapter 9 bankruptcy protection. It was the largest municipal bankruptcy in American history. Pensions for tens of thousands of former city workers were slashed. Priceless artwork at the Detroit Institute of Arts came dangerously close to being auctioned off to pay creditors. A city, once seen as a symbol of American industry, was now negotiating over every dollar it owed. Rebirth a different Detroit. But Detroit's story doesn't end in the rubble. After emerging from bankruptcy in late 2014, the city began a slow but genuine journey of renewal. Downtown and Midtown saw a new wave of investment from entrepreneurs like Dan Gilbert, who poured billions of dollars into the city's real estate. Historic buildings were restored, tech, healthcare, and the arts began filling the void left behind by the auto industry. Artist communities turned abandoned factories into creative spaces. Urban gardens sprang up on the very lots where demolished homes once stood. Detroit today is no longer the city of 1.85 million people. It was in 1950, but it's also no longer the image of ruin the media once painted it to be in the 2010s. Detroit's story is a reminder of just how fragile a city can become when it bets its entire future on a single industry, and of how policy, race, and economics can intertwine to shape the fate of millions of lives. Detroit rose because of the automobile. It collapsed when that industry left. And now, it's rewriting itself not as a car town, but as something entirely new. The question is, can Detroit hold this time?